Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of Matthew. Today we're looking at Matthew chapter 24. We're going to read verses 15 and 16. We're examining Jesus' teaching on last things or end times or the second coming. And in today's passage, Jesus references something from the book of Daniel that he said his disciples should be aware of and on the lookout for. Notice what it says. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea, let them flee to the mountains. All right, Jesus references this abomination that causes desolation, that he thought his disciples would understand his reference. And he says, when you see this occurring, be warned and be ready to flee. Something significant is about to happen. Now, what is this abomination that causes desolation? If you look in the book of Daniel and the visions that Daniel had, it's referenced 3 times. In chapter 9 of Daniel, in chapter 11 of Daniel, and in chapter 12 of Daniel. We don't have time to examine all 3 in detail because we're studying Matthew, not Daniel. But if you look at them, you understand that Daniel was referencing an event or prophesying an event that would actually first occur in the 2nd century BC, but would also be a foretelling of what would occur in the end times. So what event occurred in 2nd century BC that Daniel calls the abomination of desolation? To understand this, we're going to look in Daniel chapter 11. We're going to begin reading at verse 30, and we'll read a couple of verses of that chapter. Daniel is talking about a foreign ruler who will one day attack Israel and will attempt to destroy them. This is what it says. This ruler, he says, will turn back and he will vent his fury against the holy covenant. Some ruler will come that will attack the covenant God has with his people. He will show favor to those who forsake the holy covenant. In other words, he would try to get Jewish people to abandon their covenant with God. His armed forces will rise up and they will desecrate the temple fortress. They will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. So some foreign ruler will come and attempt to pull the Jewish people away from the covenant, will desecrate the temple and do this abomination. Who is this? Now we know that in the 2nd century BC, a ruler by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was from Syria, was attempting to expand his empire, and he conquered Judea. His desire was to destroy the Jewish faith. He required all Jewish citizens to abandon their worship of God and to begin to become Greek in culture and religion, to worship the Greek gods. He abolished the daily sacrifice. That is, he outlawed the practice of Israelite faith. He outlawed the practice of Judaism. And then he set up the abomination of desolation. What is that? He wanted to desecrate the temple to the living God. So he went into the temple and went to the great altar where the sacrifices to the Lord God were made. And on that altar, he sacrificed a pig to Zeus. Now you understand how that completely desecrated the temple. He sacrificed a pig to Zeus. That was the abomination that caused desolation. It occurred in the 2nd century BC. Now, in Jewish history, it sparked what was called the Maccabean Revolt. The Jewish people rose up in revolt against Antiochus, began a 3-year war. They eventually drove his forces out and reestablished Jewish independence. And from that point on in Jewish history and Jewish understanding, Antiochus became that figure who attempts to destroy the people of God. And in Christian history, he became a figure of the Antichrist, of what the Antichrist would be like. In other words, what Antiochus did in trying to destroy the covenant of God, the Antichrist would one day do in trying to destroy the people of God who followed Jesus. And so when Jesus says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, in other words, when you see a figure arise who was like Antiochus in the 2nd century, a figure who attempts to attack the covenant and to make people not worship God, but to worship false gods. When you see that, you will know that this is the Antichrist and that he is attempting to call you away from covenant with God. Understand that and flee from him and be prepared. So Jesus references this prophecy of Daniel, which in its first fulfillment talked about Antiochus Epiphanes in the 2nd century BC, but also foretold a day in the future when another Antiochus, that is the Antichrist, would arise and attack the covenant and attack the people of God and try to lead them away from the faith to worship false gods. Jesus says you've got to be prepared for that, and you've got to stay true to me. So when you see these things happening, know I told you. So hold to me and flee from those who would follow that spirit of Antiochus, which was the spirit of Antichrist. I will continue our looking to tomorrow. Jesus has more to say about the end times, the last days, about the second coming. We'll pick up again tomorrow. You have a great day, and I'll see you next time in our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of Matthew.